A quiet hill town wakes to distant naval thunder, too steady to be summer storms, too heavy to be anything natural. Before dawn, on 9 July 1943, the people of southeastern Sicily rise to a sound rolling over peaks and dry riverbeds, a rhythm that feels like the earth itself shifting. No one knows its cause, but everyone senses its meaning. The war, long filtered through propaganda and whispers, has come within reach. At first light, nothing on the horizon confirms the noise. The terraced fields look as they always do, shimmering gently under the heat that will soon tighten the soil. But clusters of villagers remain outside, still listening. Mothers hurry their children indoors. Shopkeepers lift shutters more slowly than usual. A few older veterans stand apart, silent, recognizing the unmistakable rhythm of naval guns carried across the sea. By mid-morning, rumors spread faster than the rising temperature. Some claim the sound is merely a major exercise by Italy's fleet. Others insist British ships are firing on the southern coast. A local teacher recalls hearing that Mussolini promised any invasion would be crushed on the beaches, but his voice carries little confidence. The carabinieri, uncertain about what orders apply, patrol the streets without clear direction, glancing repeatedly toward the distant haze. What arrives next are the refugees, first in trickles, then in small, frightened clusters. Families from the Gela region, walking beside carts loaded with bedding, cooking pots, and hastily bundled belongings. Their stories contradict years of official messaging. They speak of explosions near the shore, of aircraft strafing roads, of American troops pushing inland, of Italian units retreating chaotically. Some have seen paratroopers drifting through the night sky. Others claim German anti-aircraft fire lit the fields as if it were midday. These accounts unsettle the village more than the distant thunder ever could. The mayor tries to calm the crowd, repeating statements from the prefecture that insist the invasion is under control. But even he listens too closely to the refugees' trembling descriptions, and his assurances carry the hollow tone of someone who no longer believes his own words. Throughout the town, people prepare for the unknown in the ways they can. Cellars are cleared of old tools to make space for shelter. Livestock is moved to more secure pens. Wells become points of quiet anxiety if armies are coming. Water may soon be short. On the outskirts, farmers examine the dusty tracks leading toward the coast, wondering which army will arrive first, and whether the fighting will pass them by or swallow their fields whole. The Italian soldiers billeted nearby sense the shift as well. Many are young volunteers, barely trained, uncertain whether they are expected to mount a defense or fall back toward the hills. Their officers argue in low voices about contradictory dispatches. Some claim the situation is stable. Others whisper that entire coastal sectors have collapsed. A few men speak openly of desertion, only to fall silent when the carabinieri appear. By noon on 10 July, the truth is undeniable. Stragglers from broken units wander through the town, uniforms torn and faces streaked with dust. They describe American tanks pushing inland, Allied aircraft dominating the sky, and beachheads expanding faster than anyone expected. One soldier, trembling from exhaustion, insists that the enemy is everywhere. Another shakes his head slowly and mutters that he never saw the enemy clearly at all, only the chaos left behind. For civilians, disbelief turns into a different kind of fear, not the terror of coming destruction, but the uncertainty of shifting power. Who will hold authority tomorrow? Will the town be defended, occupied, or bypassed entirely? Will fascist officials flee or attempt to enforce tighter control? The lines between loyalty, survival, and silence begin to blur. Old women pack icons and documents into cloth bundles. Priests quietly prepare the church cellar for people who may need refuge. Farmers tie their mules to keep them from being seized. A small group of local men debates whether they should remain neutral or offer quiet guidance to whichever force reaches them first. No one speaks this openly, but the question hangs in the air. In a war where front lines are moving rapidly, What does it mean to choose a side when no side has yet arrived? As the day closes, the distant thunder fades, replaced by the hum of aircraft somewhere beyond the hills. The sky glows orange from fires too far away to identify. The town gathers at doorways and windows, each family sensing that the geography around them, once stable and predictable, is tightening into a funnel where armies must pass. Night comes slowly, heavy with heat and silence. Somewhere beyond the ridge, vehicles grind over dusty roads, though no one can tell whose. Children ask whether the war will reach them. Their parents offer gentle reassurances they don't entirely believe. And so, the inland towns of Sicily wait caught between rumours, fleeing soldiers, and the first hints of an approaching storm. The people do not yet know about the battles unfolding at Gela, Licata, and Pacino, or that the roads around Niscemi will soon become the hinge of the war. They only know that something vast has begun, and that their quiet hill town sits directly in its path. The next morning brings news carried by breathless messengers. The fighting is moving inland, and the roads to Niscemi are no longer safe. The horizon that yesterday held only heat now seems to deepen with approaching shadows, and the town prepares for armies it still cannot see. A single road cuts through rolling fields and parched ridgelines, carrying the fate of two armies and the anxieties of thousands of civilians. On 10 July 1943, this road from Gela toward Niscemi becomes more than a line on a map. It becomes the hinge on which the inland campaign will turn, and the first place where many Sicilians see the war move from rumour to reality. The first unexpected visitors arrive not in columns, but by parachute. Through the darkness before dawn, villagers near Niscemi witness shapes drifting in the sky, silent at first, then punctuated by scattered gunfire. These are American paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne Division, misdropped across a wide swath of farmland and olive groves. Some land dangerously close to stone terraces, others in wheat fields, and a few in orchards where farmers run to help untangle parachutes before Axis patrols appear. To locals, these soldiers are both startling and strangely human young men asking urgently for directions in broken Italian, pointing at maps that fail to capture the maze of mule tracks cutting through the countryside. By mid-morning, the sounds of battle begin to creep inland from the coast. The fight for the Gela beaches has erupted, and the rumble of artillery grows louder along the Niscemi ridge. Civilians working the fields near Piano Lupo see the dust clouds first, then the glint of steel from distant armoured vehicles. They withdraw toward the town, uncertain whether the approaching forces belong to defenders or invaders. In some hamlets, families grab sacks of flour, a few jars of preserved tomatoes, and whatever valuables they can carry. Others simply lock their doors and hope the front will flow around them like water around a rock. On the ridge above Niscemi, Italian and German units brace for the push. Machine gun posts overlook the Gela plain, and artillery teams sight targets along the road. These positions give the defenders an advantage, but the pressure from the Allied advance grows quickly. Reports filter in that the beaches have held, that American Rangers have pushed inland, and that armoured columns are now moving toward the ridge. The defenders, scrambling to coordinate, find their communications unreliable. Field radios fail on the rugged slopes, forcing runners to cross exposed ground where every movement draws fire. Villagers caught between these two forces watch the battle unfold in terrifying fragments. Smoke rises from the ridge. The echo of shellfire rolls down the valleys. A few daring individuals climb high terraces to glimpse the fighting. But most stay indoors, praying the front does not descend upon their streets. Those who live near the road witness scenes they will never forget. Terrified livestock breaking through fences during bombardments. Abandoned motorbikes and crates littering the roadside. Wounded soldiers, Italian, German, and American, carried or dragged to cover by comrades who barely pause before returning to the fight. As the day progresses, the Allied push intensifies. American infantry advance toward Niscemi, relying heavily on engineers who struggle to keep the road open. Craters, burned-out vehicles, and scattered mines slow their movement, forcing them to adapt quickly. At one point, an engineer unit clears a path using only shovels and improvised tools, working under incoming fire while civilians watch anxiously from sheltering walls and courtyards. The Allies know this road is not simply a route into Sicily's interior. It is a lifeline for ammunition, water, and medical support, all of which must reach the airborne troops scattered across the countryside. The arrival of American tanks marks a turning point. Their engines echo through the valleys, and their presence pushes the defenders back from key positions. Italian soldiers retreat in mixed order, some disciplined, others shaken by the sheer weight of the Allied assault. German units, more cohesive, withdraw deliberately, laying down bursts of machine gun fire as they fall back toward the Biscari area. As they retreat, they leave behind hastily abandoned weapons, broken radios, and occasionally booby-trapped fields. Civilians who return too quickly to check on farms risk stepping on hidden charges or unexploded shells lodged in dry soil. Inside Niscemi itself, the mood changes with each hour. In the morning, uncertainty dominates. By afternoon, the crackle of small arms fire grows closer, prompting families to move deeper into their homes or gather in cellars. Priests help shelter the elderly in church crypts. At one well near the outskirts, a group of women frantically fills barrels, fearing the fighting will cut off access. A few brave residents emerge briefly to help wounded soldiers, offering water or pointing them towards safer paths. But most wait silently, understanding that visibility could bring danger. By 13 July, the ridge has largely fallen to American forces, and the push toward Biscari begins. The road that once carried olives, grain, and mule carts now becomes a steady artery of Allied supply vehicles. Soldiers shout instructions, directing columns around damaged sections. Civilians stand at a distance, watching columns of men and machinery move past with a mixture of awe, fear, and resignation. The occupation they had dreaded is now real, even if the soldiers marching through seem more preoccupied with the battlefield ahead than with the town itself. Yet amid the relief that the immediate fighting has passed, word begins to spread about something disturbing near Biscari Airfield. Stories of prisoners, confusion, and violence that leave villagers unsettled. The tales are fragmented and contradictory, carried by retreating soldiers and frightened civilians, but they point to an event that will cast a long shadow over the next phase of the campaign. As the dust settles on the Niscemi corridor, the townspeople realize the road has drawn the war directly into their lives, and that the path forward will lead deeper into uncertainty. In the distance, news from Biscari travels along mule tracks and whispered conversations, hinting that the next days will reveal a darker truth behind the hurried advance inland. And so, as the front pushes toward Biscari, a new chapter begins, one marked by capture, confusion, and the consequences of a single airfield changing hands. The airfield at Biscari lies across a stretch of sun-scorched farmland, its runways carved into the dry soil long before the invasion. By 13 July 1943, it had become one of the most doubtful patches of ground in central Sicily. For days, the thunder of artillery and the whine of strafing aircraft have moved steadily inland, and now the war settles over this landscape with sudden, decisive force. At dawn, American infantry advance toward the airfield, pushing through low ridges and groves that offer little shade from the July heat. The defenders' Italian troops, supported by scattered German elements, fight hard but cannot hold against the growing weight of the Allied attack. Civilians in nearby hamlets watch the firefight from behind stone walls and half-open shutters, witnessing a violent struggle for a place that, to them, had always been little more than a military outpost. When the airfield finally falls, the suddenness of the transition is baffling. 1 hour, Axis forces are firing from trenches. The next, American troops are combing the runways, inspecting bunkers, and searching for stragglers. The heat intensifies as the sun climbs, and the dry wind carries the smell of dust, cordite, and broken machinery. Along the perimeter, scattered groups of exhausted Italian and German soldiers surrender, emerging from culverts and field ditches with hands raised. It is in this fragile, chaotic moment that events unfold that will haunt the campaign's memory. The details would later be presented in military courtrooms, but on that day, they moved through the region as unsettled whispers. 2 separate shootings of prisoners, one involving men captured by a company of American infantry, another involving airfield guards taken by a different unit. No civilians witness the events directly, but they see the aftermath. Guarded clusters of survivors marched away, medics tending to wounded prisoners, and officers speaking in clipped, urgent tones. Even without understanding the full truth, the villagers sense something deeply troubling has occurred. In the nearest settlement, people debate what they have heard. Some suggest the stories are exaggerated. Others, recalling memories of earlier reprisals by various forces, fear the worst. With both armies passing rapidly through, there is no stable authority to confirm or deny anything. Instead, the issue hangs in the air, a rumor with sharp edges, growing heavier with each retelling. Meanwhile, the American advance pauses briefly at the airfield as units reorganize. Engineers inspect the runways to assess whether they can be quickly made operational. Medical teams set up improvised aid stations in the shade of a few surviving buildings. Civilians emerge cautiously, women with water jugs, older men offering to help locate wells or show safer paths around mined areas. The foreign soldiers are strange to them, hurried, sunburned, some visibly shaken. It is clear these men have just come through an experience they do not yet have words for. As the day grows hotter, military police arrive. Officers begin questioning soldiers, documenting prisoner counts, and marking scattered graves. The tension is tangible. Word spreads that investigations will follow, that conduct must be accounted for, and that what happened at Biscari will not simply fade into the dust. But for now, the immediate priority is restoring order both on the airfield and in the villages surrounding it. Civilians, for their part, face a new uncertainty. Under Axis rule, life was tightly controlled but predictable. Now, with American troops settling in, the rules change overnight. A provisional administration arrives early representatives of AMGOT, the Allied military government. They establish temporary regulations, curfews, rationing guidelines, and basic instructions for cooperation. Ration cards are issued at makeshift tables. Local policemen, previously unsure of their standing, are told to resume duties under Allied supervision. Some villagers breathe a quiet sigh of relief. Others fear what these new authorities might demand. The sudden shift in power forces everyone to re-evaluate loyalties that had been shaped less by politics than by proximity and survival. As word of the killing spreads more widely, the Allied command takes swift measures. Soldiers involved in the shootings are detained. Officers discuss the necessity of maintaining discipline, especially in a campaign where the enemy often retreats into the mountains and where the line between combat and surrender can blur dangerously. The distinction is vital not only for legal reasons, but for the hearts and minds of civilians who will live under Allied control for months to come. Yet, even with the investigations underway, the region remains unsettled. Fathers search for their missing sons who were stationed at the airfield. Women travel from hamlet to hamlet, looking for accurate lists of prisoners and survivors. The confusion magnifies grief, leaving families unsure whether to hope or mourn. In the evenings, the airfield glows faintly from campfires and lanterns as Allied units prepare to push further inland. The runway, once a symbol of Axis control, has now become a staging point for trucks and supply convoys. But the ground feels heavy, its soil bearing both the weight of the recent fighting and the shadow of what transpired afterward. For the villagers, the fall of Biscari marks the end of one kind of occupation and the beginning of another. Some see liberation, others see disruption. Most simply see another chapter in a war that continues to reshape their lives, their routines, and their understanding of the outside world. As the Americans prepare to leave the airfield behind and pursue the retreating Axis forces into the mountains, they carry with them the burden of Biscari, an event their commanders know must be addressed, even as the campaign pushes forward. And so, as the troops climb into trucks and move toward the winding roads of the interior, the civilians watch from a distance, wondering what the war will bring next. Ahead lie the high towns Vizzini first, then the steep ridges beyond places where the fighting will tighten, and the path to Messina will narrow into stone, dust, and countless hidden dangers. High on a limestone ridge, the town of Vizzini watches the summer heat rise from the valleys below. Its switchback roads coil up the slopes like old scars, and its stone houses cling to terraces carved by generations of hands. By mid-July 1943, this quiet hilltop becomes a crossroads of armies, rumours, and choices that grow heavier with each passing day. The first Allied patrols approach cautiously, advancing through steep paths that challenge even experienced troops. For the British soldiers climbing toward Vizzini, the town's silhouette, its church tower, its clustered houses seems calm, almost timeless. But every bend in the road carries risk. Axis defenders have fortified nearby ridges, where Italian and German units watch the approaches. Knowing the terrain gives them a rare advantage. In the lower hamlets, villagers track the British advance with a mixture of fear and curiosity. They know these mountains well. The dry stream beds used as hidden trails, the mule paths unmarked on any military map, the sharp turns where cliffs drop into ravines. A few locals, cautious but pragmatic, offer guidance to British officers. They point towards safer routes around mined stretches, or draw crude sketches showing shortcuts that bypass exposed slopes. Their gestures are simple, but the information they provide shapes the next phase of the campaign. As British units ascend the final roads toward Vizzini, the defenders strengthen their positions. Italian officers, aware that many of their men are weary, under-equipped, and questioning the outcome of the war, try to maintain cohesion. Into this uncertainty step small groups of German soldiers, arriving to reinforce the position. Their discipline and confidence change the dynamic instantly. Civilians notice the difference. The sharper tone of orders, the rapid deployment of machine guns, the new patrols inspecting stone outcroppings for firing lines. Inside Vizzini, the mood shifts. The arrival of German troops unsettles many residents who had long lived under fascist authority but rarely experienced direct German occupation. Traders close their shops. Farmers from outlying areas rush to bring in livestock before soldiers can requisition it. Women move food supplies into cellars, anticipating shortages. The town's narrow streets echo with hurried footsteps and the clatter of shutters closing. By 15 July, the sounds of battle draw steadily closer. The British begin testing the defences, exchanging fire with forward Axis positions. The hills magnify every sound. The crack of rifles, the thump of mortars, the brief metallic scream of ricochets hitting rock. For Vizzini's residents, each echo feels like the war pressing its shoulder against their doors. Food scarcity worsens as fields near the front become inaccessible. Farmers risk short trips at dawn to retrieve wheat or vegetables, sprinting back when artillery begins. Families ration bread more strictly. Mothers dilute soup with well water. In the monastery, monks quietly distribute what little grain remains, offering sanctuary to elderly residents who fear being trapped in the upper town when the fighting moves closer. Along the slopes below, British scouts observe how skillfully the defenders use the terrain. The switchbacks make armor movement difficult. Narrow roads force infantry to advance in tight formations, making them vulnerable to ambush. But the Allies also recognize opportunities. Locals have shown them mule tracks that climb behind the town, routes the defenders either overlooked or judged too small to matter. These paths become lifelines for flanking movements. As the British begin pushing up these trails, civilians take shelter wherever they can. Wine cellars carved deep into rock, granaries built into old farmhouses, Even the shaded archways of the church become temporary refuges. The town holds its breath as the front settles over its rooftops. During these tense days, Vizzini becomes a place where information, more than weaponry, shapes the outcome. Priests quietly pass word about which roads are blocked. Teachers note which families have fled and where they might have gone. Carabinieri, ordered to remain at their posts, relay reports about mines found near irrigation channels or unexploded shells hidden between terrace walls. The flow of news blurs the line between survival and quiet cooperation. By 19 July, the defenders feel the pressure sharply. German units, though disciplined, know the position cannot hold indefinitely. Italian officers negotiate internally, weighing the cost of fighting on steep ground where every retreat risks catastrophe. Civilians sense that the front is about to break. The tension inside the town becomes almost physical, heavy as the midday heat. Then, as British forces tighten their grip on the approaches, rumours sweep through Vizzini. Fierce resistance is forming further inland, at Troina. Some Axis soldiers begin to withdraw toward the mountainous heart of Sicily, hoping to regroup where the terrain favours them even more decisively. Their departure leaves the remaining defenders stretched thin, fighting to delay rather than stop the Allied advance. Late on 20 July, the echoes of battle drift northward. British troops move into Vizzini with deliberate caution, expecting traps or last stands. Instead, they find a town marked less by destruction than by exhaustion. Civilians emerge slowly, offering water, pointing out which buildings are damaged, and asking anxiously about what comes next. For many, Vizzini's fall feels less like liberation than like the opening of yet another uncertain chapter. Even as British engineers begin clearing the roads and marking dangerous areas, the townspeople learn that the fighting ahead will be far worse. Messages pass along the captured ridgelines. Troina, fortified, elevated, and fiercely defended, awaits them. And so, with Vizzini behind and the mountains rising ahead, the Allied advance turns toward a place that will soon define the very heart of the inland campaign. Troina rises like a stone citadel in the highlands, its houses stacked along steep ridges that command every valley leading into central Sicily. By the end of July 1943, this ancient town had become the axis of a battle that would define the inland campaign, a place where armies collide not just with each other, but with the uncompromising terrain itself. At dawn on 31 July, the first American patrols approached Troina cautiously, scanning the heights where the outlines of buildings merge with rocky outcrops. The defenders, primarily the German 15th Panzergrenadier Division, have spent days preparing the position. Their trenches curve along ridgelines, camouflaged expertly among boulders. Mortar posts sit tucked behind stone walls. Machine guns are positioned to sweep every access route. For the Americans climbing through dust and heat, the town appears less like a settlement and more like a fortress carved from the mountain. Civilians, sensing what is coming, begin to withdraw even before the battle reaches full strength. Families gather belongings into blankets or sacks, leading children by the hand along narrow mule tracks that wind away from the ridge. Many head toward ravines where caves offer shelter. Others move between abandoned farmhouses, hoping to stay ahead of the advancing front. Some resist leaving until they hear the first artillery strike on the outskirts, a deep concussion that shivers the walls of Troina's oldest homes. As American units begin their assault, they find progress painfully slow. Each step toward the town exposes them to fire from the heights. The slopes are bare in places, offering little cover, while stone terraces funnel movement into predictable lines. The Germans hold their ground with determination, firing from positions invisible to most advancing troops. Italians in the sector, fewer in number, occupy secondary positions or support roles, but their presence adds another layer of complexity. Civilians struggle to understand who is fighting where, and which uniforms signal danger or retreat. The battle builds over the next days into a grinding contest of endurance. American artillery pounds the heights, shaking Troina's stone houses, sending tiles sliding from rooftops. The explosions echo through the valleys, rolling like thunder that never fully dissipates. Civilians crouched in caves feel each detonation as a tremor in the earth. Many cover their ears not to block the sound, but to calm children too young to understand why the mountain seems to be roaring. On the makeshift frontline aid stations set up behind ridges, medical teams struggle to keep up. The terrain makes evacuation difficult. Stretchers must be carried along narrow paths under erratic fire. Civilians, encountering the wounded, offer water or direct medics to hidden springs and safer routes. Some guide the teams through old sheep tracks that bypass exposed slopes. Their knowledge of the land becomes essential. Though they rarely linger long, each minute spent in the open risks their safety. Inside the caves and ravines, families create fragile routines. Mothers boil water over small fires. Men pasture cautiously for figs or leftover grain in abandoned fields. Priests move between shelters carrying rosaries and whispered reassurances. News arrives, sporadically snippets from passing soldiers, or reports carried by young men who venture into the edges of town to see what remains. They return, describing shattered facades, leaning bell towers, and alleys filled with dust and broken masonry. By 3 August, the battle reaches its peak. American attempts to flank the town meet fierce resistance. Every ridge taken reveals another. Every approach cleared opens onto a new line of hidden defenses. Troina's geography seems to resist the assault as fiercely as the defenders do. Officers speak of the town as a strong point of rock, a phrase that spreads among exhausted soldiers as both an explanation and a warning. Then, on 4 August, the weather shifts. A haze settles over the heights, muting visibility. The Americans use the moment to advance artillery closer, dragging pieces by hand through the rocky terrain. The bombardment that follows shakes the entire mountain. Some defenders begin to withdraw, not in panic, but in recognition that they cannot hold indefinitely against the relentless pressure. German commanders issue orders to prepare fallback positions near Randazzo, though small units remain behind to delay the enemy. Civilians who risk a glance toward the town during this phase see a landscape transformed. Smoke curls through the ruined streets. Walls stand like shattered teeth. The familiar outline of Troina is now distorted by rubble and fire. And yet, for all its brokenness, the town continues to hold, slowing the Allied advance day after punishing day. On 5 August, the final act of the battle unfolds. American forces seize key ridge positions, tightening the noose around the defenders. German units begin withdrawing methodically, covering each other as they slip through mountain paths toward the northeast. When the firing finally fades, the silence feels unreal, like a breath held too long. Civilians emerge hesitantly from their shelters, blinking at the sudden calm. The aftermath is brutal in its simplicity. Entire neighborhoods are gutted. Roads are blocked by collapsed terraces. Household items, a pot, a child's shoe, a photograph, lie scattered among the debris. American units move carefully through the ruins, wary of mines and booby traps. Engineers begin clearing paths so medical teams can reach the last wounded. Families search for neighbors, calling out names that echo strangely through the wreckage. Troina has not broken, but it has been reshaped by the battle in ways that will define its memory for generations. And as the American forces regroup, their gaze turns toward the next barrier, the twin strongholds of Centuripe and Regalbuto, where the mountain war will tighten even further, and the path to Messina narrows into the island's final, formidable gate. Centuripe rises like a crown of stone above the Simeto Valley, its narrow lanes spiraling upward through a maze of houses built along steep ledges. To British troops approaching on 1 August 1943, the town appears almost unreachable, perched on a ridge so sharp and elevated that it seems to defy assault. Yet Centuripe must fall. For beyond it lie Regalbuto, Adrano, and the final corridors leading toward Messina. The climb begins at dawn. British infantry advance through terrain that punishes every step. loose gravel that slides under boots, terraces that funnel movement into exposed angles, and sheer drops that offer no room for error. Above them, German troops of the 3rd Panzergrenadier Division hold commanding positions. Their machine guns overlook the valley routes. Mortars are hidden behind crags. Even a single well-placed rifleman can stall an entire platoon. The defenders understand the terrain and use every advantage. Civilians who remain in the scattered farmhouses below watch anxiously. Many families fled days earlier, retreating deeper into the hills or sheltering in vaulted wine cellars beneath the town. Those still present carry water to shaded corners, whisper prayers, and keep close track of the battle's shifting sounds. The ascent is slow, marked by bursts of gunfire and the heavy thump of artillery that sends dust rolling down the slopes like waves. To circumvent the steepest approaches, British units follow mule tracks suggested by locals. These old routes wind along the backside of the ridge, narrow and uneven, but less exposed than the main road. Soldiers, burdened with equipment, move single file through these paths. The guidance is invaluable. Without it, the approach might have stalled entirely. Inside Centuripe, the defenders brace for the breach. German officers understand that losing the town will force them toward a shrinking line of retreat. Yet, they fight with discipline, shifting between firing positions along balconies, alley corners, and stairways carved into the rock. The residents who remain witness the uneasy coexistence soldiers slipping into doorways for cover, families huddled silently in back rooms, whispers urging the old and the young not to move until the guns fall quiet. By late afternoon, British infantry reached the lower streets. The fighting that follows is intense but controlled. House-to-house clearance, room-by-room searches, careful movements through courtyards littered with rubble. The narrow streets amplify every sound: boots striking stone, shouted commands, the echo of rifle fire bouncing between walls. Civilians hide in granaries, in church sacristies, or behind heavy wooden doors, waiting for footsteps to pass. As night falls, the British secure several key positions within the town, but Centuripe does not yield easily. The defenders retreat to higher ground, forcing the Allies to fight their way up twisting alleys and steep staircases. The darkness brings no relief. Instead, it fills the passages with tension, where any shadow might conceal a rifle barrel. At dawn on 2 August, a coordinated assault begins. British troops push through the upper streets, clearing balconies and rooftops. German resistance stiffens briefly then, faced with encirclement, begins to withdraw. As they leave, they set charges in certain alleyways, delaying Allied pursuit. Civilians hear the explosions from behind shuttered windows, each blast a painful reminder that the battle is still unfolding around them. By midday, Centuripe falls. British soldiers plant a flag on a high terrace, signaling the end of a fight that cost days of exhausting effort. When the defenders vanish into the hills, silence descends abruptly, broken only by the distant rumble of artillery from the direction of Regalbuto. Families emerge slowly from hiding, blinking at the sunlight after days in basements and cellars. They move through damaged streets, assessing which homes survived and which walls must be rebuilt. But for the Allied advance, there is little time to rest. Regalbuto, only a few kilometers north, awaits, and the Germans intend to hold it long enough to slow the push toward Adrano and the northeast coast. Regalbuto's position is similar to Troina's, a ridge town overlooking deep ravines, with limited access routes that defenders can easily block. When the British approach, they find the surrounding hills alive with movement, German troops shifting positions, sappers preparing obstacles, and artillery guns already sighted on likely approaches. The town becomes a back-and-forth battleground, each side seizing and losing ground over the course of several days. Civilians trapped in Regalbuto endure a frightening limbo. They hide in stone basements thick with heat. They crawl between rooms during lulls in the fighting, scavenging for bread or filling small jars at wells that might not survive another bombardment. Families huddle under staircases built centuries earlier, whispering to keep children calm. The soundscape becomes a constant roar. Artillery from the British side, counterfire from the Germans, and the sharp crack of rifles echoing through narrow streets. Engineers play a crucial role here. Allied sappers work tirelessly to clear mines, marking safe lanes with strips of cloth or piles of white stones. They scrape rubble from collapsed roads so infantry can advance, and they escort mule columns carrying ammunition along precarious paths. One misstep could send a mule and its vital cargo slipping into a ravine. Yet, without these columns, the fighting in the upper town would stall. As the first days of August draw to a close, the battle reaches a breaking point. The Germans, having delayed the Allies as long as possible, began a coordinated withdrawal toward Adrano, and eventually the Messina Strait. Their retreat is deliberate, designed to buy precious time for the final evacuation. When the last defenders slip away under the cover of darkness, a heavy silence settles over Regal Buto, broken only by the dripping of damaged cisterns and the low murmur of civilians emerging from hiding. The Allies take the town with a mix of relief and exhaustion. Engineers expand their work, clearing remaining traps and stabilizing damaged structures. AMGOT representatives begin preparing for administration, even though the smell of gunpowder still lingers in the streets. But the rapid Axis retreat changes the landscape instantly. Towns that had been battlegrounds only hours earlier fall into sudden quiet. The road to Messina lies ahead, narrowing with each mile, drawing both armies toward the final act of the Sicilian campaign. And for the civilians watching from shattered windows and smoke-stained doorways, this abrupt silence carries a new kind of fear. What will happen when the fighting moves on and the weight of survival falls entirely on their shoulders? When the guns fall silent in August 1943, the mountain towns of central Sicily wake to an unfamiliar sound. The absence of war. The thunder of artillery fades. The sky, once streaked with smoke, returns to its harsh summer clarity. Along narrow streets and ruined terraces, civilians emerge into a world that has changed more profoundly than any single day of fighting could show. With the Axis retreating toward Messina, Allied troops began taking control of towns they barely had time to learn the names of. In many places, soldiers enter streets still coated in dust, stepping past abandoned trenches and collapsed walls. They find families living in basements, children blinking at the sudden daylight, elderly residents clutching rosaries or ration sacks. There is relief, yes, but also confusion, grief, and an uncertainty sharpened by months of occupation, bombardment, and displacement. AMGOT officers soon arrive, establishing the first framework of Allied governance. Their tasks are enormous. They must restore order in places where authority had vanished overnight. They must regulate food distribution, reopen schools, reappoint local officials, and navigate loyalties that remain tangled by years of fascist rule. In some towns, they reinstate carabinieri to enforce curfews. In others, they bring in military courts to settle disputes ranging from theft to suspected collaboration. For civilians, the new system feels both rigid and strangely reassuring. Ration cards are issued simple slips of paper that determine who receives flour, oil, or salt. Bakeries reopen under guard, producing small loaves that disappear as quickly as they emerge from the ovens. Schools attempt to resume lessons. Though many classrooms are damaged or occupied by troops, teachers improvise with whatever chalk and paper they can find, trying to restore a sense of normalcy for children who have lived for months in a world defined by fear. Water becomes a critical concern. Wells damaged by shellfire must be repaired, and in some villages, engineers spend days clearing rubble from cisterns or diverting small springs back into communal basins. Civilians line up with clay jugs, exchanging news quietly as they wait for their turn. The heat of late summer makes every bucket feel like a lifeline, but even as life begins to reassemble, scarcity shapes every decision. Food shortages intensify, driven by burned fields, disrupted harvests, and destroyed storage barns. Families ration small portions of pasta, stretch vegetables into thin soups, and barter whatever they have: olive oil for bread, eggs for cloth, labor for grain. The black market grows in the shadows. Traders arrive from surrounding areas, offering goods at impossible prices. AMGOT officers attempt to crack down, but the need is too great, and the networks too deeply rooted in local knowledge. Old intermediaries, figures who once navigated the grey zones between legality and survival, reappear. Some locals welcome them as problem solvers. Others view them warily, worried they will take advantage of the power vacuum. Rumours spread that the mafia, suppressed under fascism, is resurfacing. Some claim Allied officers are turning a blind eye. Others insist the influence is exaggerated. The truth varies from town to town, often depending on who speaks and what they stand to gain. Families continue to search for missing relatives. Men who fled during the fighting may still be hiding in the hills, uncertain whether the new authorities will treat them as deserters or survivors. Women walk from village to village, hoping to find sons who were stationed at outposts that never returned from the front. In places like Troina and Centuripe, mass graves and hastily buried bodies must be identified. A painful process made harder by the lack of records and the chaos of retreat. Slowly, reconstruction begins. Allied engineers repair roads, clearing landslides and collapsed terraces so supply convoys can move again. They patch bridges with wooden beams, reopen narrow passes, and restore routes that define every economic exchange between the mountain towns. Civilians join in, carrying stones, digging ditches, and repairing roofs with recovered tiles. In some places, entire neighborhoods work side by side, not as acts of celebration, but as necessities for survival. As these towns rebuild physically, they also begin the equally difficult work of constructing memory. What does liberation mean when it arrives amid loss? How should a community remember a summer defined by fear, hunger, and sudden upheaval? Conversations at fountains, church steps, and evening gatherings reveal sharply different interpretations. Older residents recall the chaos of occupation and see the arrival of the Allies as salvation. Younger men, angered by destroyed fields or the loss of friends, view the transition more skeptically. Women who endured bombardments while caring for children remember the months not in terms of armies, but in terms of survival, of finding water, of shielding the family, of carrying on. Even within families, memories split. Some emphasize the cruelty of retreating forces. Others highlight moments of compassion, like a soldier sharing water or a nurse tending to a stranger's child. The war leaves no single narrative, only layers of experience shaped by where one stood when the front passed through. By early 1944, many towns resumed something resembling daily life. Markets reopen, though with limited goods. Churches fill again on Sundays. Fields begin to recover. But the imprint of the summer of 1943 lingers everywhere, in cracked walls, in the absence of familiar faces, in the quiet caution that meets every discussion of politics. The campaign has ended, yet its shadow stays long after the dust settles. And for the forgotten Sicilian towns that stood along the inland corridors of Operation Husky, the war's legacy is preserved less in battle reports than in the memories of those who survived it. Farmers who hid their families in caves, children who grew up listening to the world explode around them, priests who buried the dead in hurried rows, and countless civilians who learned that liberation, like occupation, carried its own burdens. A new future begins, but the summer of 1943 remains a fault line, a moment when history pressed itself into the stones and streets of Sicily's high towns, shaping their stories for generations. History lives in the quiet places where wars leave their deepest marks. Share this journey so more people can uncover the stories behind the headlines. Like, comment, and subscribe to support more documentaries that explore the overlooked corners of World War II.